Thank you for listening.
Broadcasting worldwide, online 24/7.
Afrik Best Radio is online radio is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on Last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice to your brand. Others provide readers and experience that can truly define your brand and business. Afrik Best Radio advertising is different. It gives your brand a voice and reminds listeners about your product or service. Those who hear your ad can build a mental image of your brand based on the message you deliver.
Hello and welcome back to Storytelling. And we've been gone for a couple of weeks, and we apologize for that due to some technical difficulties. But now we are back, and we're going to continue on with our program on storytelling on the topics of characterization and character development. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we have for you today. This is Storytelling. I'm your host, Richard, and we are sponsored by Afrik Best Radio. Don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back with the rest of the program.
Thank you for listening.
Today for more information. English 00855-81645-101. Khmer 00855-12367-764. Or visit our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Afrik Best Radio is online radio is either.
Welcome to the first part of today's program on the topics of characterization and character development. And basically what we're going to be talking about is different ways where you can write characters and different ways where you can develop characters throughout a story to make them not only interesting but memorable to the people who are reading, watching, or however it is that they experience your story. And these type of techniques in characterization and in character writing doesn't have to only apply to fictional writing or to writing of characters that don't actually exist in the real world. Because these kind of tips and tricks that we're going to show you in a bit can also be used when you're writing stories about actual events that happen or you're telling stories about real people. What it is that we're going to give you are some things that you should focus on and some things that you can try to focus on when you're telling these stories and when you're trying to develop these characters. The importance of this is that if you're able to write a convincing character and one that is standing out and one that is memorable towards the reader or the watcher or however it is that people do experience these stories, then you're able to make a connection between them and something that exists within your story. In this case, that being the character. If you're able to write a good character, the story sticks with people. Of course, there's other elements to a good story. Case in point, stuff like good plots, good world building, and all these other stuff. But one of these important things as well is the characters. You want to be able to make sure that the reader, and I'm going to call him reader from now on, but you want to make sure that the reader is able to not only understand and truly experience this character that you thought up, but you want them to be able to have a connection in some way, whether that is them relating to it or not. The important thing in this case is to make sure that your character is interesting, well written, and memorable to the reader. But the way you do this can be different depending on what the character's purpose is in your story and how it is you want them to interact with the reader. And this can be done in many ways. Let's say you have a main character and you want the reader to be able to relate to the main character, and you want them to be able to see themselves in the shoes of this main character. How might you do it? Well, if you want the reader to be able to insert themselves into the story, it might be advantageous to make sure that this character has kind of a straightforward personality, or a kind of personality where the reader might be able to easily just put themselves in the slots of this character. Or if you want a character that the reader might not be able to relate to, but instead be able to sympathize to or to believe that is real, you might want to write a character that feels real and that has a complex and thought out personality and character traits that, although might not be similar to the reader and might alienate them from actually relating to the character, it will still allow them to understand and experience this character in a different way. In the end, the most important thing when you're writing a character is to make sure that you know exactly the relationship that this character is supposed to have with the reader in question. And if you're able to understand this kind of characterization or this kind of technique well, you're able to write these characters in a way that fit into these stories really well. But the most important thing is for you to understand where each character stands in the narrative of the story, in the themes of the story, as well as in the relation towards the reader. And once you have all these three down, you can really get into the nitty-gritty of these different type of characters. And when you're starting to write a character, when you're starting to think of a character, let's say you have an idea of who the character is in the story, who the character is in regards to the themes of the story, and who the character is in regards of his relation or her relation to the reader themselves. Now you gotta start writing the character. And how would you do that? How would you basically plan out this character in a way that allows them to be able to fit into the story really well? Well, if you got the foundations of who you want them to be, of how you want them to relate to each different character in the story, and you have all these kind of relations thought out, it's actually pretty simple to start writing the character. But there are a few things that you might want to look to include in this character. There are a few things or a few tips and tricks that will allow these characters to be believable. One of which is thinking about the character motivation. Basically, you take a character. Why are they in this story? What is it that they want? What is it that they're going for? What is the motivation that drives this character forward? In some cases, or in some stories where the character motivation is lacking, where you don't have a proper reason for a character in particular to be heading towards the goal that they're heading for, that can kind of destroy the believability of this character and kind of discount the intensity of this character chasing the goal. Some of these characters can be seen in the oldish fairy tales from before, or at least old stories where characters just kind of did things without consideration or without thinking about what it is that they want. And if you think right now, it's a little bit difficult to name these kind of characters at the top of your head, because without a proper character motivation, you lose basically the interest, or you lose the reader's engagement on thinking about whether they're going to get there, how they're going to get there, and what's going to happen after they manage to get whatever this motivation is. So starting out, you want to think about what the character wants. A few examples from popular movies and from popular stories would be something along the lines of, let's say, the character of Harry Potter. His goal throughout the series is that he is supposed to beat Voldemort and avenge his parents. And I bring this up as an example because in the first half of the series, while defeating Voldemort and while finding all these things are part of his motivations, it takes more of a background seats. and you kind of just see him do things at the school, which is why if you look at the earlier books of the series, you'll see that Harry is actually not a fan favorite character, which is strange because even though he's the main character, if you look at any ranking, he's below a lot of these other characters, maybe 4th, 5th, or even 6th place in the polls. However, if you look at the latter half of the story, where Harry no longer is a reactive protagonist, where he just waits for things to happen, but he is fully pursuing his goal, where his character motivation is brought to the forefront of the story, you'll see that people kind of shift back and his rankings rise in the character popularity charts. And this kind of shows the importance of how basically massive it is to make sure that the characters you're writing have a motivation and have a reason that they're moving on. And on top of that, once you have the motivation in mind, you might want to look at different traits for these characters. And basically what this is you're thinking to yourself, or you're writing down and planning what makes this character that character. What makes them unique? What makes them different from the other characters in the story or the other characters in real life? What about them screams them? Is it a special ability? Is it a different way of thinking? Or maybe their character is just that they are completely ordinary. Whatever it is, whatever these traits are that you're trying to get for these characters, the most important thing is that you make sure that it works in context of the story. Does it flow well with the rest of the story? Does it flow well with these characters? And you need to basically be able to think about these stuff and put them together in a way that works. And how do you tell if these character traits work? Well, a way to do it is just once you have all the character traits, you put them in a situation within the book setting. You put them in the situation within the setting and the themes of the story and see how well they can play off it. Basically, you want to see if that these characters are able to function well in the setting that you're writing them into. And if they're not able to function well, you might want to change a few traits here and there to make sure that they are functioning better. Of course, this is keeping in mind that sometimes a character's job, a character's reasoning for existing is to not function well within the setting. And if this is the purpose of writing the character, you need to make sure that that purpose is amplified when you take these traits and these motivations and you test them against the setting of these characters. Another thing that you can do is think about what about this character that is supposed to hook the reader in. This is basically thinking about the main appeal of the character. What is it about this person that is supposed to resonate with the reader? Is it their views on life? Is it their ability to always win? Or is maybe it's because they always lose? Maybe they're an underdog, or maybe they are a superhero in their story. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you understand what about this character that readers are supposed to attach to. Because if you have that, if you have the motivation, the character traits, and you identify the traits that the readers are able to attach to, then you're able to push towards, or you're able to amplify these kind of character traits that the readers are going to be most interested in. And if you're able to do that, if you're able to get the reader interested in the right character traits that you're focusing on, and this is more of the way you write it, but if you have a character that character traits are interesting and you're able to express that to the reader, then you can really make a character that makes a good impression. But having a good character isn't always enough for the reader. Let's say you have this whole plan, you have this whole massive piece of paper or massive document with all the character traits, motivations, goals, and all these different things that you plan into this character let's say you make him feel real and you make him feel extremely likable or extremely hateable, depending on what it is that your character is supposed to do, but it's all done, it's all thought out, and it's all amazingly planned out. How do you get that to the reader? Because you can't just present them with a character sheet and expect them to fully relate and fully get behind this character. Now you need what's called character development. And a lot of the times, character development is confused with another thing called character progression, where the character grows throughout the story. But what we're talking about today is character development. How well you, as the teller of the story, is able to develop this character from what you have on the sheet to what the reader is able to experience. Of course, you can't just have an information dump of all of their character traits and motivations and all these different things that allow the characters to understand, allow the readers to understand the characters. Instead, you'll need different techniques to allow the readers to slowly or quickly understand these characters in different ways to allow them to fully immerse themselves within these characters and these stories. That is character development. And that will be what we talk about after the break. So don't go anywhere and stick around, because when we get back, we'll continue with our program and talk about how to develop these characters that you've made up.
Recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.africbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser.
So, you got your character all thought out. You have the little details of your characters in your mind or on your writing sheet. And you know exactly what each character will do in each situation, how they gel with each other, how they fit into the world. You properly written out the character motivations. You properly thought out the character traits, and you identified and highlighted the traits that are going to hook the readers in the most. That's the planning stage. Now you need to get these different things. You need to get these traits. You need to get these motivations and these hook traits from your mind to the reader. And how do you do that? Well, when you're writing a story or when you're telling a story, there's a lot of things that you can do to bring your character to life. And this is after you planned your character and you know exactly what your character is supposed to be. And how do you do this? Well, there's a simple rule in storytelling that is repeated over and over. And a lot of the time, but not all of the time, this also applies to character writing. The rule is that with any type of information, if possible, you should show and not tell. And what basically this means is that you try to allow the reader to experience this information from the story and from the setting and from the way that you tell it, rather than telling them the information outright. Let's say you write a character that has a short temper. The difference between showing and telling is the difference between saying outright, oh, this character has a short temper, and showing it in a way. Maybe the room the character lives in, as you describe it, has a lot of broken things and a lot of things lying around everywhere to show that he is aggressive towards his room. Or maybe you show a scene in which this kind of character trait is shown to the reader or to the listener. That's one way of allowing these character traits to get from the writer to the reader by showing. And showing can be done in a lot of ways. And I'll give you a few ways now, but it can be done in so many ways. And this can be anything from actions that this character would commit, or like things that this character would do, and the difference between what they would do in front of other people and what they would do when they're on their own. And the importance of this is to show that, or to show the difference, or if there is a difference between the way the character acts if there are people around and the way he acts if he's on his own. Because you can see a lot about a character if they're on their own, because without people viewing them, without other people there to cast opinion on them, you can see how they would act naturally. Or maybe they're uncomfortable when they're alone and they act more naturally when they're with other people. These things can be thought about, and these things can be implemented in ways that allow the reader to fully understand, or to fully get information from this character. What type of person is he? Is he more active on his own? Is he more active with other people? What type of things does he do when he's around people? What type of things does he do when he's alone? What lifestyle do these characters live? How do they keep their room? How do they walk? How these different things, how does the character function from day to day? And this is important because if you're writing a story, or you're telling a story where this character gets put into an unfamiliar situation, which is a lot of the time a really easy conflict to write and a really effective way to create conflict, by putting a character in a situation where they are not used to and where they're not comfortable with, then it is very important for you to show us what this character is like when they're in a situation they're comfortable with. That way we're able to draw the contrast, and we're able to draw a line between how they act when they're somewhere they're comfortable and somewhere they're uncomfortable. And this difference can drive the story. The difference can allow you to see the difference between how they act, but it can also show you the little minute details about this character that you probably thought up. Maybe when he's nervous, he does something, a tell. Maybe he scratches his head, or maybe he stands super still. Whatever it is that this is, if you establish it early on, and if you allow the reader to associate this with the character, you can use this in many creative ways. You can use it to explain the situation that, oh, now the character is feeling nervous, without saying it outright. And it's these type of little motifs and little actions that you can give a character by allowing him to be in a situation they're comfortable with, in order to either subvert or reuse these type of actions later on in the story. And another way that you can show a character's personality, or you can show a character's trait, is basically by taking a look at how other people view him. And this is kind of a mixture of both showing and telling, because this can be done in simple ways where you can have other people talk about your character and see what it is that they say, or you can have it so that they act a certain way around your character and a certain way around not your character. And these little details, while it might not always be picked up, maybe when your characters are on the friend group, a friend group acts a little bit more quiet and reserved than when he's gone. Maybe that signals that he's not that good in social situations. These things might not always be picked up if you don't say them, but if you leave them there, and if you just show the reader that these kind of things are there, even if they're not brought to the forefront of the reader's minds, more often than not, it will be lingering in the background of the reader's mind, allowing them to kind of process what kind of character they're looking at. And this is extremely important, because later on, when you're allowing your character to, if you're writing a dynamic character which goes through character progression, you can use this as a contrast. Let's say a character grows in a certain way, and people view him differently. If you establish that they view him a certain way beforehand, and you establish that they view him a certain way after, a different way, then this can be used as a way to show the character's growth. Or if the character is a static character and they don't change over the course of the story, you can use these little interactions with other people and these little things that other people say about the character to show that throughout this story he doesn't grow as a person, or that he doesn't change, doesn't revert, doesn't grow, and he stays stagnant. But these aren't the only things that you can do with his interactions with other people. Not only can you use it as a contrast, but you can use it as a way to build into character traits that are more subtle. Maybe there are traits about him that other people notice and he doesn't. A good way to show this is to have other people acknowledge it instead of him. Maybe the way he acts around certain people, or maybe the way that certain people act around him, shows you something about his position in the world or his relationship with other people. And all of these things can build up to make this character feel more real. Because if you look at a real person, then you'll know that they have different types of relationships with different types of people. They have different connections, they have different ways of communicating, and they have different ways of basically being around different people. And if you were to provide your fictional character with these type of nuances, and you provide them with these different type of interactions, it just makes this character feel like a more well thought out and more real character. As if this character, even if they are fantastical in nature, even if they have abilities and traits about them that aren't exactly of real life, you'll still be able to allow them to feel like they could exist in real life. And these different type of connections help towards that extremely. But showing different things about the character isn't the only way that you can develop a character. Telling is another way to do it. And while a lot of the times it's frowned upon, sometimes it can be extremely useful to allow a character to talk about themselves or to explain themselves. When you have a character talking, whether it's a monologue to himself or whether it's a conversation to other people, you're allowed a chance. If this is, of course, if you're writing from a third person perspective and you're not in the mind of the reader, in the character, this offers you a chance to see how the mind of the character is working. Whether this is just a peek into the mind where they talk to themselves or talk to other people, this is extremely important to build the internal character. Because the external character, the way he acts and the way that they would interact, these are all how they would interact in the outside world. And these are all actions that can be done by the character, and while this allows you to understand the character better, you can't understand the character completely without taking a delve into their thought process, into how they think, how they make decisions, how do they decide what to do, what's right, what's wrong, what's going on in their mind, basically. And with this, there are different ways to do it. Again, you can have these scenes of the character by themselves, and what do they do, how did they think, but sometimes it might be useful to just tell us what the character is thinking. Of course, use it reservingly, and don't always tell us what the character is thinking, because in many situations, not knowing what the character is thinking is extremely advantageous to the story. It keeps the reader guessing, it keeps the reader wondering what it is that's going through the mind of the character, and anticipating what comes next. So, while it is important to allow your reader a dive into the mind of the characters to see what it is they're thinking, it's also important to use that sparingly and to not always go into the mind of the character, to allow the readers in different situations to guess what it is that it's coming next. And if you allow the reader to engage with the story in this way, allow the reader to basically try and predict what's coming next and try and predict what the character is thinking. What this allows them to do is invest themselves into the story. Now they're no longer a passive observer of a story that's unfolding, but they're actively trying to solve or actively trying to think about what comes next. And this is extremely useful in types of mystery novels and type of thriller novels where the reader is supposed to be kept guessing. In this case, it's important to give just enough information so that the reader is able to get the right answer, but not guaranteed to get the right answer. If you get the reader working and thinking about what it is that's going to happen next, about all these different things, then you get them hooked onto the story and onto the characters. And then you can develop the characters even more by putting them in many different situations. We've talked so far about situations that they're comfortable with and situations that they're not comfortable with and their interactions with other characters. But now let's take a look at what would happen if we do both of those simultaneously. Let's say we put them in a different setting, a completely different setting with characters that they don't know and they have to interact with. How would they act? More often than not, this kind of thinking is more of a thought process into thinking and developing the character as a whole. But this can also be used within the story itself to allow the reader to experience the character in different kind of settings and in different kind of little interactions with different people, fleshing out this character more. And now we come back to these hook traits. These traits where you know the reader will get attached to, and these are the defining and the important traits of the character. How do you show them? The important thing about showing these traits is to be able to put the character in different situations that amplify these traits. And this is kind of a collection of all the things we've talked about in different settings, in interaction with different characters, and the use and lack thereof of the use of allowing us to understand what's in the character's mind. When you combine these three and you use it together, when you put them in a situation with characters and with a little bit of information about what's on their mind, but not all the information about what's on their mind, and you talk, or at least you tell about how they deal with it, if the situation is one which allows the reader to really zone in and really understand the hook traits, the important traits about this character that allows you to relate to them or allows you to be interested and invested in them, then these could be really good opportunities to build these characters and to allow the reader to attach to these characters. Because the more interested the reader is to the character, the more they're going to try to find out more, and the more attention they give towards the story as they're trying to figure out, ooh, what's next? What about this character? Or maybe they just like the character a lot and they want to figure out what happens next to the character. There's a lot of ways to basically develop your character and allow the reader to understand the character as well as relate to it. But these are just a few examples and a few ways that you can do it. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be taking another break now, and when we come back, we'll close off the program with a summary as well as some other things. Don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back.
Afrik Best Radio is online radio, is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work on can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice to your brand. Others provide readers and experience that can truly define your brand and business. Afrik Best Radio advertising is different. It gives your brand a voice and reminds listeners about your product or service. Those who hear your ad can build a mental image of your brand based on the message you deliver. Contact us today for more information. English 00855 81645 101. Khmer 00855 123.
Welcome back to the third and final section of today's installment of storytelling, where we talk about characterization as well as the development of these characters. To start off this section, let's go over the things that we've just been through recently. The importance of characterization, basically, the reason that I'm talking to you now about this topic is that with an interesting character and with the character developed in a way that allows the reader to understand fully about the character, it allows them to not only attach to the character but be more interested in the story in general as well as the other elements of the story and the character. And when this is done well, it allows characters to stick in the mind of the readers long after they're done reading the book. If you ever just find yourself remembering a different character or a person from a movie or from a book or from a story or any of these kind of things, if you remember these different traits about the characters, this is just an example of good character telling or characterization, where you're able to think back years later or months later and just remember little things about this character, whether it is how they acted in a certain situation or whether it is something that they did that allowed you to attach with them. These kind of things are extremely important in storytelling because you want people to be invested in your story and you want them to remember your story. And because of that, there are a lot of techniques that have been developed and altered and built upon over the years for characterization, or at least the process of thinking about a character, the process of planning out a character. And a lot of these things come back to three main little things that you think about. The motivation of the character. Why is it that they do what they do? What is it that they're going for? What basically in their mind drives them? Is it a simple goal? Is it a complicated goal? Do they just want to make it in the world? Do they want revenge? Do they want to go to a place to do a certain thing? Or do they want nothing? The character motivations are what basically allows you to understand where the character wants to go. And that allows you to try and relate and see if you can, or see if the character will get there. And on top of character motivation, there are character traits. What is this character like? Basically, the different things about the character that makes him that character. What does he do? How old is the character? What does the character look like? How do they walk? How do they talk? Where are they from? What would they do in this situation? What would they do in that situation? What about this character makes them unique to that character? Basically, you're thinking about, in this case, you're thinking about different things that make up the character. And a way you can do this is by just looking at real people and thinking about what makes them them. Is that person tall? Are they fast? Are they smart? Or maybe not? Are they good at anything in particular? Are they not good at anything at all? What kind of foods do they like? How do they keep their room? Do they make their own food? A lot of different things, a lot of different kind of questions you can ask towards your character to see basically what kind of traits they might have. And once you develop these traits, now you have to think about some of these traits, you have to think about which ones of them are the ones that are going to keep the reader engaged. These are the hook traits, or at least what I'm calling hook traits. These are the traits that hook in the reader and allow them to be reeled in and to be attached to these different characters. What is it? How or why are the readers supposed to like this character? Or maybe they're supposed to hate this character? After you have a purpose of the character in the story, what is it that the reader sees in them, or the reader are supposed to see in them, that allows them to keep with the character? And this could be anything. This could be basically, maybe they're charming in a certain way, or maybe they're absolutely terrible, or maybe they're the best person in the world. You need to understand what it is about this character that allows readers to stick with them. And once you understand that, once you have this all planned out and written down, you can start developing the character in the story. Basically, writing them into the story in a way that allows the reader to fully understand the character, because otherwise you're just going to be having you're just going to have an amazing character that doesn't translate well into the story, because you're not able to show off all the reasons why this character is amazing. How do you do that? Well, there's a few different ways. You can do that by showing them in different situations, as we mentioned before, situations that they're comfortable with, situations that they're not so comfortable with. Or you can allow them to interact with other people. How do they talk with them? How do they talk alone? Do they talk differently between different groups? Do they try to pretend to talk a certain way? Or do they talk a lot with some group and less with other groups? Or do they not talk at all? Then you think about how other characters react towards this character. What do they say about him? What do they think about him? How do they behave around him? And once you get these kind of things down, then you think about the internal logic of the character. And sometimes you don't have to tell us at all what the character is thinking. Sometimes it's best to tell us everything the character is thinking. But what's important is that you need to allow the reader to know that the character is thinking, that they're having a thought process. And whether it is a thought process that is explained, that is shown to the reader, or one that is kept under lock, and in order to keep the reader guessing, it is important to at least have a thought process in the character, so that the readers understand why they do certain things that they do. And then finally, you combine them all together to amplify the hook traits of the characters. You put them in situations where their most admirable traits, or the traits that are supposed to keep the readers engaged the most, are being shown. You put them in situations with people that amplify these traits, and you use their internal monologue and their internal logic to allow the reader to understand that better. And basically, that's just a very few basic tips on how you can develop your character. Of course, these tips can be used a lot or not at all, because there's so many ways to allow the reader to understand what kind of character they're looking at, that it's not stuck to these just different or 2 or 3 different types of characterization techniques or character development techniques. As long as you fully understand what the character is supposed to be in the context of their story, and as long as you understand how you're supposed to develop the character and what about the character you want to be amplified by the end of the story, then you can go and try different things, see what works. Maybe you show them interactions with other people, but it doesn't really do anything for the reader. Cut it out, change it for something else. The best thing about character writing is that it's dynamic towards the story that you're writing, towards even the individual scenes that you're writing. And this is what makes it so difficult, but at the same time so interesting and so amazing if it's done well. Because a character doesn't always fit the scene, and a character doesn't always behave in a certain way in different scenes, and these kind of things can change Maybe a character is not interesting at all, and that's the hook. Or maybe the character is a terrible person and the readers are supposed to hate them with everything they got. If that's the case, then write it as such. But the best way to get better at this, the best way to allow yourself to write these amazing characters that will stick in the mind of the readers for a long time, is to just experiment with it. Write a character. Does it work? What works about him? What doesn't work about him? Write another character. And after a while of doing this, after a while of thinking up characters, putting them out, and testing them against your own reading or maybe a friend's reading, allowing people to experience it, you'll eventually gain kind of a voice in this type of character writing. Basically, you gain a type of accent or a type of style, let's call it, of writing characters. And once you get this, you want to stick with this because your individual style is one of the best selling points of writing a character if you do develop one. And I've said earlier that this can also apply if you're talking about real characters, because now if you're thinking about real characters, you now want to take into account these different things that we've talked about, but instead of making up traits, look at the traits that the real character have and you choose what is it about them that you want to amplify. What about them would keep the listener or the reader engaged? And then you go on from there. Characterization, character writing, and character development are extremely advanced skills that can be picked up very early on in storytelling. You can start writing characters right away, and with the right amount of dedication and work, they can be good. But it takes a lot of effort to make truly great characters. So the best thing that you can do is take all the advice that you've heard here, take all the advice that you heard elsewhere for character writing, and kind of combine them together, throw them against the wall, see what works for you. Because character writing can be dynamic from person to person and from story to story. What's important is that you do what works for you in this type of writing style. And that is all we have for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Storytelling this week, and thank you for listening to the program where we talk about characterization and character development. We hope you take something away from this, and we hope that after this program, you have a better understanding of how characters are written. Whether it is so that you can write your own characters, or whether it is so that you can appreciate better the characters in different writings of fiction as well as different writings of nonfiction. Whatever it is, we hope you get something from this, and we hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time. This was Storytelling. I'm your host, Richard, and we are here from Afrik Best Radio. Thank you, and see you next time.
Afrik Best Radio is online radio is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.africbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on Last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work on can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice to your brand. Others provide readers and experience that can truly define your brand and business. Afrik Best Radio advertising is different. It gives your brand a voice and reminds listeners about your product or service. Those who hear your ad can build a mental image of your brand based on the message you deliver. Contact us today for more information. English 00855 81645 101. Khmer 00